Welcome to my ranking of films which came out in the year 1990, or at least the ones that I've seen, and I can reveal that I have seen a whopping 38 movies which came out in this particular year. I'm not going to rank them all or I'll be here till Christmas. I'm just going to do my top 25. That is a comfortable number for me, I think, when it comes to videos like this. So I've got 13 honourable mentions today which do not make the ranking, but I have seen all of these movies, so I'll read them out. Texas Chainsaw 3, thank God I don't have to talk about that film again. Pretty Woman, Buried Alive, Bird on a Wire, Marked for Death, The Craze, Home Alone, Rocky V, Misery, Hard to Kill, Revenge, Arachnophobia, and The Witches. That just shows you how deep this year is, that none of those movies, some of which are quite good, quite watchable, none of them have made it into my personal top 25 for 1990. So before we get into it, the usual reminder that the film which wins this ranking today will be going through to the eventual grand final of 100 films. The film which comes second may also end up in that final, numbers permitting. So let's crack on and find out what is my 25th favourite film that came out in 1990. This is a courtroom drama starring Harrison Ford as a guy who's having to defend himself against murder charges. Bonnie Bedelia plays his wife. This is the only film, apart from the Die Hards, I've ever seen her in, and it would have come out around about the time of those early Die Hard films. So for me anyway, she's an actress who had this little golden era of being in lots of things and then just kind of disappeared off the radar. This is a solid film. It's not something you would see big stars like Harrison Ford appear in nowadays. I think films like Presumed Innocent are kind of covered more by TV shows nowadays, things like CSI and NCIS, but there's not much you could criticise about this film. I did have to go on Wiki to sort of remind myself of the plot because I haven't seen it in 25 years. Me and my dad taped it off the TV at one time, and I think my dad insisted that we immediately tape over it again because in his eyes it was a little bit boring once you'd seen it once. But for me, it's just a little bit of a higher quality film than all those others I was just rattling off. I like this one better than Three Men and a Little Baby, mainly because the little lady is actually a character. You know, I mean, how much can you fall in love with a baby that's not even yours? With a little girl, it's different. You can get to know her personality, and I totally get why it would be a gut-wrenching thing for these three guys to have to watch this girl go to a different country. Potentially, they might not see her again. Now, this film does do that stereotypical thing of presenting all Britons as being people who speak like the royal family, and there are telephone boxes, red telephone boxes everywhere. Everyone drives in a Mini, you know, all sorts of little annoying things. But if you can look past that, this is quite a funny and endearing film. It has a nice, happy ending, and I kind of like it. Now, whilst I do consider this to be the weakest Psycho film, I still think it's really good. There's no such thing as a bad Psycho film, unless you count the remake, although I've never actually seen that, I do confess. I must reiterate as well that even though this has only come 23rd, we did start out with 38 films today. We're almost at the halfway point of the rankings already if you look at it in a certain way. I do think the past and present format of the narrative in this works really well, much better than if they'd have gone ahead with the same thing in Die Hard Year One. Thank God that is cancelled. There's an actress in this who plays Norman's mum. I can't remember her name. She was the star in Black Christmas, and she was also in It. She's a really good actress, and I think she was a really good fit to play Norman's mother in the flashbacks. So considering the fact that this was a TV movie and was probably made very, very cheaply, I've got a lot of time for it. I think it's a really good series closer. This one doesn't have the greatest of reputations, but I think it's all right. It does suffer from not having Robert Duvall in it. I only found out the other day, actually, that there's now a brand new version available for this on Blu-ray, which has a completely different ending, but I've no interest in hunting that down because I've always thought that the ending to The Godfather 3 is fine, you know. I think they gave Michael Corleone a very appropriate fate, given all of his past sins. What on earth have they done with the new version then? Does he go off into the sunset with his daughter or something? Speaking of which, I don't think that actress who played that role was very well cast in this. I don't want to come out and call her a bad actress because it can't be easy acting in the same room as Al Pacino and being on his level. I mean, this is a guy who has to pretend to have a stroke in this film, and he absolutely sells it. It's incredible. So the film as a whole is all right for me. It just suffers because it's a sequel to two of the greatest gangster films ever made. This is an unusual one for me to have enjoyed because it's not usually my sort of thing, and yet enjoy it I did, albeit it was a very long time ago now. I felt very moved by the end of this film, not to the point that I was tearful or anything, but I felt like I'd been on a powerful emotional journey. Every so often, I will watch a film which is completely out of my comfort zone and I will enjoy it and I will just sort of give a round of applause in my head at the end. I've no real desire to see this again, but I do look back on it and think of it with a lot of respect. And this of course was back in the days when Johnny Depp really had the magic touch. Everything that he was in, even if it was something really odd like this, would somehow be a really good film. Nowadays, whether you think it's deserved or not, he just can't buy a hit for love nor money, can he? This is a tough one for me to rank because the first time I watched this, I thought it was amazing. I was on the edge of my seat. I couldn't take my eyes off it. As soon as it was done, I was telling all my friends about the film. I told my brother. But then at some point afterwards, I bought it on DVD, tried to watch it again, and I had a completely different experience. I just found myself not able to stand the Henry character. His wife is so irritating in this, and really the whole film is populated by unlikable arseholes. And once the Tommy character dies with about half an hour left, it's a real drag to finish this thing off. Over the years, I've tried occasionally to go back to it, but I can just never get that original experience back that I had. It is a very witty film. It does move along at a very good pace, but I don't know. I just don't like the characters. I think that's the biggest problem for me with this. But I'd certainly have no problem with anybody calling it a gangster classic. Maybe it is, but I just don't think it's a film that you can watch a lot of times, if you see what I mean. So in terms of where I'm placing it in the rankings today, I need to take account of the fact that I loved it on first viewing, but I also need to take account of the fact that it has died a death for me over recent years. So I think 20th out of 38 is about right. I don't have too much to say about this one. I love the first Delta Force. It came very high in my 1986 rankings. This one is not as good. I rented it during the 90s, but it's fine. You know, it's Chuck Norris on another mission somewhere in South America. He kills loads of drug lords and things. It does what it says on the tin, although sadly it doesn't have that amazing theme tune that the first film had. If I saw this film going very cheap, I would absolutely pick it up and give it another spin all these years later. This one's very vivid to me because I only bought the Blu-ray about 6 months ago. It cost me £15. I sort of regret buying it now because I didn't enjoy it as much this time as I did back when I was a teenager when I first saw it. I mean, it's still a well-made film. It's directed by Catherine Bigelow. It's about this cop played by Jamie Lee Curtis who gets stalked by a psychotic stockbroker who spots her in a supermarket at the start of the film and then just becomes obsessed with her. And then for the rest of the film, it's all cat and mouse, and they end up having this dramatic shootout at the end. It's all right. I don't know. There's just something about it this time around which didn't quite cut the mustard with me. But if you've never seen it before, I'd still recommend it for at least one viewing, especially if you like thrillers. For a lot of people, Child's Play 2 is the best in the series. I think 3 is just a smidgen better than this one, though. Having said that, I don't think any of these films are ever going to crack the top 10 of any of these yearly rankings videos. I have seen all of these films. I've actually reviewed all of them. I've got my own playlist just for Child's Play reviews. I'm actually surprised looking back that I did those because I'm not the most natural fan of Child's Play. There's a weird thing when it comes to me in this series. Whenever I'm watching a Child's Play film, I do really enjoy it, I think, but then a few days later, when it's had time to sink in, my brain somehow convinces me that no, I surely didn't enjoy it as much as I thought I did. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but there you go. Before I move on, I'll quickly say that the toy factory scene at the end of this particular one is absolutely amazing. I didn't realise this when I was writing these down, but Prom Night 3 is actually quite similar to your bog standard Child's Play film in that you've got a killer doing people in a semi-jokey sort of way and then firing out a quip afterwards. I love the Mary Lou character, especially this version in number 3. I wish this actress had played this role again. It is a horror comedy, and I'm not usually the biggest fan of that subgenre, but this film is just so amusing to me. It's not available to buy in Region B, sadly. I had to watch it on YouTube, where you can watch it for free, I'll let you know that. But when I tried to put it on my big TV, it was a little bit blurry, so I had to just watch it on my phone on this tiny little reduced size of a screen. But despite that, I still really enjoyed it. I could easily imagine myself watching it on my phone again. Here we have another flashback to my days of watching films on terrestrial TV back in the 90s. It's another attempt to latch onto the success of the Lethal Weapon films. It's very entertaining though, in the same way that Tango and Cash from the previous year is entertaining. I would probably just about prefer Tango and Cash over this, but I've got no quibbles with the Rookie at all. It's very, very cool. Clint Eastwood and Charlie Sheen are the two cops from completely different generations who are having to work together. And the only strange thing about the whole thing, I guess, is the title. This film is just as much about the Eastwood character, from what I can remember, as it is Charlie Sheen's character. At the time of doing this video, Puppetmaster II is the only one of this series which I have seen, and there are about 10 or 11 of them at this point, I think. And I haven't even seen this one since the 90s. I'm really having to sort of stretch my memory a little bit for this. I vaguely remember, though, this really cool Gothic castle and all these different little puppets just popping out and killing all these characters who had gone to this place to stay for the weekend or something. And the kill I remember the most is this grotty looking fat woman who comes across this one puppet and she's got a shotgun and you think she's just going to blow it away, and then turns out the puppet has got like a miniature flamethrower in his arm and he just completely torches her. I've got vague memories of other sort of bits and pieces in the film. I'm going to revisit these soon, and in the case of the first Puppet Master, it's going to be my first ever viewing. I've got 1 and 2 on Blu-ray. I bought them quite recently, actually. I just haven't put them on yet. I guess I'm just sort of still trying to decide whether I'm going to watch them and review them or maybe just watch them. I don't know. The best of the Maniac Cop films, though I've reviewed all 3. I've even got a playlist specifically for Maniac Cop. This one, though, is so stylishly made. It's got great action, great twists, great use of pyrotechnics. Robert Davi's in it. And the image of Matt Cordell walking by the side of a park in this film, swinging his truncheon left and right, and then gutting Bruce Campbell, will never leave me. This one's done well to come 12th because I don't think it's that well known. It stars Gene Hackman as a guy who has to protect Anne Archer's character so she can get to trial and testify against these bad guys, but the only way to get her there is on this train. And it's the sort of train which has live-in compartments on it because it has to cover such huge distances between train stations. It passes through all these remote landscapes and mountainous areas, and there are bad guys who get on this train with the intent of killing Anne Archer, and Gene Hackman can't even tell where the bad guys are because they're sort of hidden in the crowd sort of thing. There's not a lot of crazy stunts and action in this film, but it's a thriller which thrills. You've just got no idea what's coming next. I've seen this one a couple of times, and both times I've really enjoyed it. It's just really, really cool. And it sort of reminds me of the train sequences from Russia with Love, one of the all-time great James Bond films. Both Young Guns films were a steady part of my diet during the 1990s. If I had to pick a favourite, I'd probably just about go for the first one. I think they were pushing it a little bit by doing a sequel, but it's so entertaining. There are so many moments throughout Young Guns 2 where you just find yourself laughing at whatever antics Billy the Kid is up to. It does get quite emotional towards the end, though, when Doc and Chavez finally die. I saw an interview with Emilio Estevez not too long ago, actually, where he said he would absolutely be up for doing a Young Guns 3 even now. And I guess you could do it because it's sort of left open at the end of number 2 as to whether Billy the Kid dies or not at the hands of Pat Garrett. You sort of see this guy in Young Guns 2 in the 50s who might be Billy the Kid, aged about 80. So I guess if you made it canon that he does survive Young Guns 2, you could do a third film where Billy's about 60 and it's the 1930s. I have no idea what you would do with that, but certainly Estevez seemed up for it. I don't think it will ever happen. These films were sort of moderately successful at the time. They were not mega hits, so yeah, I think Emilio will be waiting some time on that one. Do you want it balloon? Do you want it? Sorry. I saw it on TV in the 90s. They showed it in 2 different parts, and my experience of this was a little bit like my experience with Kill Bill. Let me explain that one. So the first part of it absolutely blew me away. I mean, I don't know if I had to wait one more night to see part 2 or whether the TV stations kept us waiting another week. I'm not sure, but I was super hyped for part 2, but it just wasn't quite as good somehow. I think the novel of it does a much better job of fusing the 2 timelines, which are separated by about 25, 30 years from what I can remember. And my experience with Kill Bill was similar. You know, loved the first part, but the second part was a little bit disappointing when I finally saw it. The only way to watch both it and Kill Bill is if you completely commit to doing the whole thing in one sitting, because if you try and split it, my experience is that you don't then go back for part 2. So I do like the 1990 It. I'm not sure if I like it better than the new ones or not, the new It films. I haven't quite figured that out yet, but certainly this was a good experience from my youth. So we bounce from one epic to another because I'm pretty sure that this film is even longer than It. I only saw it the one time, back in my mid to late 20s, I'd say. I actually bought it on DVD without even having seen it before, and it was the longest possible version that I bought as well. But you know what? Back then, before I had kids, spending 4 hours on a night watching Kevin Costner try and get into some woman's wigwam didn't really seem like time wasted. These days, I have to be a lot more choosy about how I spend my precious hours that I have free. It's a great film, though, in all seriousness. Cinematography is amazing. I like the slow pace of the story. Kevin Costner's honest acting is really endearing. It's just not a film that is that rewatchable, I don't think, which is why I gave my copy of the DVD away at some point. But make no mistake about it, although I wouldn't call this a cinematic masterpiece, it's certainly a really top-notch film. Now, this is the stuff because Flatliners has one of the most amazing casts ever put together for any film that was released in the 1990s. It stars Kiefer Sutherland. It stars, none of the other names are coming to me right now. It stars Kiefer Sutherland, Oliver Platt, William Baldwin, Julia Roberts, and Kevin Bacon. I think all their characters are medical students, and what they're trying to do is flatline themselves one at a time. They can't all do it at the same time, or how would they ever get back? But when they're dead, even though it's only for like a few seconds or a few minutes at a time, they go into these weird otherworldly place where their past comes back to haunt them, and they sort of bring ghosts back into their normal lives. It's a weird setup to just explain to someone if they've never seen the film before, but it's really good, this film. It's like half thriller, half horror. Kiefer Sutherland probably gets it the worst out of all these characters, but some of the others have really horrific experiences as well. And in the middle of it all, Oliver Platt is just stood there in the background saying, "No, I'm not taking part, you're all idiots." There are quite a few horror comedies on today's list, I've noticed, but this is definitely the best of them. Gremlins 1 and 2 were a big thing in my household when I was growing up. We watched them every single year. I do prefer the first one. It's more of a traditional horror film, and it's got that really nice, Christmassy family feel to it. This one, Gremlins 2, it's just 90 minutes of just wacky fun, but it's really good. It only really has one scary moment in it from what I can remember, and that's when one of the gremlins turns into a giant spider. I'm really glad that they kill that thing off quickly. I do really like the one who takes that brain potion so that he can speak. It's a top quality film. This Joe Dante is an absolute genius. And I'm a little bit surprised that they never went on to make a third. I do know that the second one didn't do that well at the box office, but you'd think in this era of reboots and redos that they would have come back to Gremlins. I mean, they've gone back to Critters, which was always way below Gremlins in terms of popularity and how good those old movies were. So yeah, at some point, come on, give us another Gremlins film. I still remember the exact day that Back to the Future 3 came on TV for the first time, at least in the UK. It was Christmas Day of 1993. Me and my dad were already a big fan of the series. We really wanted to take this one to complete our collection for the shelf. But the trouble is, we were due round at my aunt's for Christmas lunch at the same time that the film was going to be on, and we didn't know how to set the VCR. We didn't know how to set the timer on it. So we came up with this plan to take a cassette tape around to my aunt's and just hope that she would let us tape the movie while we were around there. But it turns out that they were taping something of their own on the other side, a film that I can't remember what that film was that they were taping, but it was a darn sight worse than Back to the Future 3. It was a real kind of, oh, god damn it moment. But eventually we got the movie. I mean, I think from that point they put it on TV every single year. This was the perfect end to this trilogy. I mean, sometimes with franchises like Gremlins, I'll really yearn for another one when I've finished watching what's available, 1 and 2. But with Back to the Future, I don't feel that way at all because it just ends in the most perfect way. I've always been under the impression that people put Robocop 1 in a league of its own, and then there's a massive gap down to the sequels 2 and 3. But for me, Robocop 1 and 2 are in a league of their own, and then there's this massive gap down to number 3, and then there's the remake, which I confess I've never even bothered to watch, just got no interest in it. But I love Robocop 2. I think it's just as exciting and as brutally violent as the first one. The bad guy, Kane, he really scared me as a kid. I mean, that scene where he takes that corrupt cop in a side room and just hacks him up. I mean, that was some dodgy shit for me as a child to be watching. I felt like the child who was in the actual scene watching that. I love the fight at the end between Robocop and the Robo-Kane thing. And I love the moment when they're trying to make new versions of Robocop and they bring this one out. And I think they're expecting him to do a little demonstration, firing his gun and stuff. But all he does is just take his helmet off and go, and then collapse to the ground. It's so funny. Some great comedy in this one. I love the mayor character. He's just hilarious. Every time he's on screen, I'm just having fun watching him do his little fast talking shtick. So yeah, I'm a big fan of Robocop 2. Coincidentally, this is another one which I saw before the original, and as such, I've got a massive love for it. I always hear people say that Die Hard with a Vengeance is the best Die Hard sequel, but not for me. I think Die Hard 2 absolutely destroys that film. And I'm not going to talk too much about this one today because I just got done talking about Die Hard 2 when I did my Die Hard film series rankings a couple of weeks ago. So that's a bit of a coincidence that I'm back in the position of having to talk about Die Hard 2 again. So I guess the question I have to ask myself is, how did that happen? How does the same shit happen to the same guy twice? I can't even tell you how gutted I am that this film is not going through to the final. I mean, I just can't believe it. I think if Tremors had been in any other year that we've had so far, it would have found a way into the top 2 somehow. But it's just one of those horrible years where there are 3 incredible movies and I've got to eliminate one. So I'm going to eliminate Tremors. And the sad thing is that probably none of the Tremors sequels will qualify. If one was going to get to the grand final, it was going to be the original. I have such a long history with this film. I watched it for the first time when it came on UK TV, I think Christmas '92. I go that far back with this series, but I've always loved it. Kevin Bacon and Fred Ward just had some of the most amazing chemistry ever seen on screen. This is another horror comedy, isn't it? So Gremlins 2 is not the highest placed horror comedy today. Tremors is, but yeah, it's wonderful. And my favourite scene in the movie, hands down, is when Bert and his wife are trapped in the cellar. And the first time you watch this, you just think to yourself, yep, yeah, these two are goners, because that's just how it would go in any other horror film. But somehow they've got this wall full of guns, and you think they're just going to put up a good fight and then they're going to die, but they just slowly wear this creature down, and it's just such an amazing scene, and they survive at the end of it. Absolutely love that. But there are like 15, 20 scenes in this movie I could go through. At some point, I'm going to do a Tremors review series. I absolutely see that in the future of this channel if I keep it going long enough. I'm just so sad that it's not made the final. So I guess we have to sort of dry our tears, or at least I will, and let's find out, therefore, what films have made it through to the final, starting with the movie in second place. I know some people right now are probably thinking, you put Predator 2 through to the final ahead of Tremors and Die Hard 2. I know, but you know what? I love Predator 2 more than Predator 1, probably. I'm not sure about that. But for me, this is one of the most underrated, well-made sequels of all time. I don't know why this didn't really resonate with people for the most part. I guess the fact that Arnie didn't come back was a big factor, but Danny Glover more than makes up for Schwarzenegger's absence for me. I mean, what Glover lacks in muscles, he more than makes up for in personality. And Glover just puts 110% into this role. You can tell he's just absolutely going for it in every single scene. It's absolutely amazing. I love Bill Paxton's death scene on the train. It's just one of the saddest deaths I've ever seen in an action film. Want some candy? This film works as a thriller, it works as a horror, it works as a cop buddy film. It could almost work as some kind of weird sci-fi giallo. It's so exciting. This film scared the crap out of me as a kid. I mean, the scene where they find all the bodies torn up of the Colombians, and then later on the Jamaicans in the tower block, and that was such a scary scene for me. And then Ruben Blades' character goes back there at night on his own. I was like this watching him go up to investigate that scene. Totally like that. And later on, there's just so much atmosphere. The slaughterhouse, and when Danny Glover, what's his name, Lieutenant Harrigan, he goes down underneath the ground, and it turns out they've got one of their little spaceships down there, and there's about 10 predators turn up. I've got this film on DVD in a steelbook. Absolutely love it. Don't anybody ever let anybody tell you that Predator 2 is not just 2 hours of awesomeness, because they would be wrong. Right, rant over. Let's find out what's at number one. Yep, Total Recall is our winner today. I don't think I need to go on as big a rant about this one, because I think a lot of people think that Total Recall is an amazing film. I think I'm pretty safe in not being criticised for this one. This could well be Arnold Schwarzenegger's best film. The only Schwarzenegger films that can compete with Total Recall, probably the first two Terminators and Predator. This film had such an influence on me. It made me interested in Mars. It made me interested in the planets. It made me want to go and watch more films set in space. It made me want to watch films that would have nothing to do with anything that you see in Total Recall. It's a film that influences you as a kid, to do other stuff. And it's got one of the most amazing stories. I mean, you can't even remember it. That's the beauty of it. Every time you come to this film for a ninth or a 10th viewing, as it probably is with me now, I still have to concentrate, because the stuff to do with the memory loss is quite intricate. So I'm always sort of really paying attention. It never gets stale coming back to this. It's got so many great action sequences. I love the Benny character. Hey man, I've got 5 kids to feed. And the stuff in the Johnny cab. It's got some great villains. The visuals are absolutely stunning. Sharon Stone, amazing. Rachel Ticotin deserves a mention as well. She's not as famous as Stone, but she is absolutely awesome in this film as Selena. I'm struggling on the name there. And of course, Arnie. He was absolutely in the prime of his life when he did this movie. It's just an absolutely awesome film, and it was very comfortably number one for me when I sat down and started to work out which films were going to go where in the ranking. Total Recall, in my mind, was always going to be number one, and then the rest of the films would just be battling out for second spot. So I guess that brings us to the end of today's video. There is one more question left to ask, though. I've written 4 down today, not that I anticipate watching them anytime soon. I just wanted to sort of get into the spirit of things. But Internal Affairs, I've always heard, is a really good, intriguing action film set in the world of the police, maybe. I don't know. Exorcist 3 apparently is a lot better than Exorcist 2. I've only seen the original and I didn't really enjoy it. At some point, I've promised myself I will give The Exorcist one more chance. Surely it has to be better than the experience that I had a year or so ago when I tried it. But I do hear good things about the third one, which is why I've written it down on this list today. But I think there's a lot of ground for me to get through before I get to The Exorcist 3. Miller's Crossing is apparently a really good gangster film. I've just never got around to seeing that. And the last film I've got written down is probably the one that I would want to watch the most out of these, which is Two Evil Eyes. It's a film which is split into two sections. So it's actually, it's sort of like a short story anthology, but there's only two really long stories in it of like an hour each, I believe. One of them is by Dario Argento and the other one's by George Romero, two directors I absolutely love. So this is a film which I really should watch, in all honesty. Right, we'll leave it there for today. I will be back soon with another rankings video for 1991. Until next time, cheerio.